In the grand halls of religious history, names like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Mecca echo with reverence. Pilgrims travel across oceans to walk where prophets once stood. But hidden in the shadows of this global spiritual map lies a land that held the sacred and was quietly forgotten. That land is Africa, long before it was seen as a continent of crisis. Africa was a cradle of divine destiny. It fed the prophets. It protected the Messiah. Africa was not on the sidelines of holy history. It was the stage. Moses, the great lawgiver of Israel, was not raised in Jerusalem. He was raised in Egypt, on African soil. The Nile carried his basket. African royalty raised him in Pharaoh's palace, and African wisdom shaped his spirit. Without Africa, there would be no Moses. Moses learned to lead from African generals, learned to write from African scribes, and stood tall in the palace of Africa's mightiest kingdom. The 10 Commandments were first etched into the heart of a man trained by Africa. Before Moses came Joseph, sold by his brothers, carried to Africa in chains. But destiny had a different plan. In time, Joseph rose to become Prime Minister of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. When famine struck the world, it was Africa that had food. Africa became the storehouse of survival. The world came, and Africa fed them. Joseph, once a slave, became a savior. Africa, through him, nourished nations, including the very brothers who betrayed him. Africa was the table where the hungry were fed. Even Abraham, the father of faith, sought refuge in Egypt. In a time of famine, he walked into Africa and found provision. It was African soil that kept the promise alive. Then came the most powerful moment of all. When King Herod hunted the newborn Messiah, it was Africa, not Rome, that gave him refuge. Jesus lived his early years in Egypt. He walked its dusty roads. He breathed its air. He was sheltered by Africa. Somewhere on African soil are the forgotten footsteps of the child savior. Yet the world rarely looks back. Africa shielded the Son of God, but was erased from the story. In the early days of Christianity, Africa didn't just follow, it led. The first Christian university rose in Alexandria. African minds shaped the foundations of Christian theology. Names like Tertullian and St. Augustine weren't imported. They were born of African soil. Augustine of Hippo, one of Christianity's greatest minds, was African. Tertullian, who coined the word Trinity, was African. Mark the Evangelist, author of the Gospel of Mark, founded the Coptic Church in Africa. Africa's role didn't end with Christianity. When early Muslims were persecuted, Prophet Muhammad sent them to Abyssinia, in modern-day Ethiopia. There, a Christian king gave them refuge. Africa, once again, opened her arms to the sacred. And yet, while millions journeyed to Jerusalem, Mecca, and Rome, the land that raised Moses, fed Joseph, and protected Jesus is forgotten. The Nile, that carried stories as old as Genesis, is now silent in the minds of many. You've heard of Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. But have you heard of Lalibela, Ethiopia's stone churches carved directly into mountains, built in secret, inspired by visions from God? Timbuktu, Mali's ancient center of Islamic knowledge, home to sacred manuscripts that predate many Western philosophies. Great Zimbabwe, a city built with divine geometry, still standing as a silent monument to African sacred engineering. Alexandria, one of the first 5 patriarchal sees in Christianity, along with Jerusalem, Rome, Antioch, and Constantinople. Why are these places not spoken of in holy texts or classrooms? And Egypt was only the beginning. In Ethiopia, the Ark of the Covenant is said to rest, protected for centuries by African priests. This land gave rise to one of the world's oldest Christian kingdoms. Before Rome declared Christianity legal, Ethiopia had already embraced the cross. Then there's Nubia, south of Egypt, its own kingdom, with its own gods and sacred geometry. They built pyramids too, over 200 of them, many older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. These were not just kingdoms, they were spiritual civilizations. Africa's sacred legacy must not be forgotten. Its temples deserve restoration, its stories deserve to be retold, and its children deserve to remember who they are. The next pilgrimage should not stop at Jerusalem, but continue to Lalibela, to Nubia, to If, to Kemet. We must walk where our ancestors once stood, speak the names they preserved in memory, and rebuild what was taken from us. Because Africa is not just the cradle of life, it is the soul of something eternal. Let the world remember, this is not a plea for pity. Africa is not begging for validation. It is a call to remember. Remember the pyramids that watched over prophets, the deserts that hid divine secrets, the mountains that cradled monks. Africa is a holy land, and it always was. This is not to sow division or anger, but to ask, why is the land that held the Christ child, raised Moses, and crowned Joseph not honored as a holy land? If this story moved you, don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe and drop the next forgotten history you want us to bring to life. Africa's voice is rising. Let's tell it together.